We really have been enjoying playing V3 since we got our hands on it, and you can hear our overall thoughts on it by clicking the little pop-up thingy in the corner. Spoilers, we generally like it. But when I found out they were changing Fire and Manoeuvre, I was very sad. Because as a wargamer, I naturally yearn for the next edition of my favourite game, but I also hate change. So, to try and mathematically soothe my pain, I've taken a deep dive into what it means for the US in V3. So, fair warning, if you don't want to see the stats and just want an overall summary, jump to this time. But for all you maths fans, to keep things as simple as possible, but no simpler, I'll be looking at how many wounds you can expect 12 riflemen to get when shooting at regular troops. Let's start all the way back in V2. The squad advances, targeting regulars in the open at normal range. For non-US armies, you'd be hitting on a 4+, followed by a 4+, so for your 12 shots you could expect 3 wounds. If however you were playing US, you'd be hitting on a 3+, so for your 12 shots you could expect 4 wounds. So pretty good, but where it really shone was the classic situation where the target is behind a wall and your squad's advancing up to shoot them at long range. In this situation, most armies would be hitting on a Super 6, i.e. a 6 followed by 6, which means that less than 1 in 5 times here you'd cause a wound. If you compare that to the US, who, ignoring the move penalty, would be hitting still on a 6, they would be expecting to actually cause a single wound each time. This is where Fire Manoeuvre really shines, when it turns a Super 6 into a normal 6. Now, back to the future. Let's take the first situation again, but under the V3 rules, where the base to hit has been moved to a 4+. So a non-US player would be hitting on a 5+ because they moved, and there's no long range penalty anymore. So with the 12 shots you could expect to kill 2 men, or 1 less than in V2. But what if we had V2 Fire Manoeuvre using the V3 rules? Well, in this case, the squad who advanced would be still hitting on a 4+, and you could expect to kill 3 men. The difference being 1 man, exactly the same as it was in V2. So what about the V3 Fire Manoeuvre? Well, now you'd be hitting on a 5+, but with 16 shots for your 12 men, and so you could expect 2.67 wounds. But wait a minute, there isn't a long range negative anymore, so what if the squad, who are more than 12 inches away, just stood still instead? Well, in that case, you'd expect to kill 4. So, in summary, for a squad in the open, V3 Fire Manoeuvre is slightly worse than V2 when you're moving, but quite a bit better if you stand still. But let's go back to the situation where V2 Fire Manoeuvre was really outshining other nations' rifle fire. An advancing long shot against a squad in hard cover, and we'll test that under the V3 rules. Here, standard armies would be hitting on a 5+ because they moved, wounding on a 4+. With the 4+ save, you'd expect 1 wound. And if we still had V2 Fire Manoeuvre for the V3 rule set, you'd have 12 shots hitting on a 4+, wounding on a 4+, and with the 4+ cover save, you'd expect 1.5 wounds, which is slightly better, but nothing compared to the massive differences we were seeing in the V2 rules. So what about the new Fire Manoeuvre? Well, now we're talking 16 shots at 5+, resulting in an expected 1 1/3 wounds, or somewhere between the two. Better than the other armies, but not much worse than V2 Fire Manoeuvre really. But, remembering they ditched the long range penalty, what if we try the new Fire Manoeuvre trick of standing still again? Well, now you'd expect 2 wounds. So the summary again here is that we see Fire Manoeuvre in V3 is worse than in V2 if you move, but better if you stand still. Well, hold on a minute, I bet you're screaming at your screen. Point blank is a 2+ now, so I bet that's what's made the whole thing overpowered and meant they had to change it for balance. Well, let's have a look at that one. Again, using the V3 rules, moving up to point blank, a non-US army can expect a -1 to hit for moving, but a +2 to hit for point blank, or overall hitting on a 3+, and they'd expect to cause 4 wounds. US under the V3 rules, but using the V2 Fire Manoeuvre, well, they'd hit on a 2+, and you'd expect 5 wounds. If we go full V3 and use V3 rule set with the V3 Fire Manoeuvre, well, you're back to a 3+ to hit, but you've got 4 extra shots, which gives you 5.33 wounds. And if you still have all your men next turn, so you're hitting on a 2-up, you can expect 6 2/3 wounds. So here we see that V3 Fire Manoeuvre is actually better at point blank than V2 Fire Manoeuvre, regardless of whether you manoeuvred with your fire. So, if you're just joining us for the overall summary, or stayed with us for a mathematical adventure, the headline is V3 Fire Manoeuvre is slightly worse than V2 Fire Manoeuvre, if you manoeuvred. But it's still a lot better than non-US rifle fire. But where it really shines is if you stand still. So the US just got a bolt action boost. As a competitive US tournament player, I must be delighted. Well, not really if I'm honest, and to be absolutely clear, this is my own opinion based primarily on analysis and the opportunities I've had to play the army so far in V3, which has been somewhat limited due to the rulebook not being in general circulation quite yet at time of recording. But with that disclaimer out of the way, the two main issues I have with this rule both centre around how this changes the way the army feels to play. As a Hollywood history wargame, I'd expect the US to be advancing up in small squads, BARs at the shoulder, under the covering fire of their platoon mates. V2 really encouraged this playstyle, but the first issue with the new fire manoeuvre is it's actually better to stand still and fire than to fire manoeuvre. Secondly, because it only applies to rifles, it punishes any player who chooses to pay additional points for a BAR, which is nearly as iconic in terms of the US in World War II as a Thompson submachine gun. Will I still play the US in bolt action? Probably. Will I be sad every time I issue an advance? Probably. Therefore, what I'd love to see when we get the Armies of US book is either we revert fire manoeuvre back to its V2 thematic version, or at the very least, we count those BARs so people are not punished for fielding them. Ta-ta for now.